We will move on to the next segment of our webinar, and I'm going to switch gears to Joseph Dimino. Joseph Dimino is a member of the research staff on this IES practice guide. He provides professional development to teachers, administrators, paraprofessionals, and parents in early reading, vocabulary, reading comprehension, and behavior management. Joe consults in the areas of early literacy, vocabulary, and reading comprehension. He's been a panel member on 2 other IES guides, Response to Intervention in Reading and Foundational Reading Skills, and a researcher for the RTI Mathematics Practice Guide. He's co-authored books on reading comprehension, early reading interventions, and vocabulary instruction. Welcome, Joe. And he will be co-presenting with Joan Morris. She's a retired teacher specialist from the Pasadena Unified School District. She also served as a panel member on the IES Practice Guide. She worked with English learners throughout her career at the Pasadena Unified School District. She taught in bilingual classrooms and structured English immersion classrooms. She was the coordinator of English learner programs and established a Newcomer Center for secondary English learners. And she brought the Seal of Biliteracy, an award given to graduating seniors who prove their proficiency in English and another language to the district. Welcome, Joe and Joan. I'll turn it over to them.
Thank you so much, Linda. It's a pleasure to be here to talk to you about the EL Practice Guide and in particular about academic vocabulary instruction. And I'd just like to mention as a panel member, it was a thrill as a teacher, a classroom teacher and a resource teacher to meet with researchers and also to find out, it was very gratifying to find out that the practices that I saw were successful in the classroom are found based on research shows that they're very successful. So what you know as a teacher works in the classroom is research-based, what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to start with recommendation 1. Our major focus of academic vocabulary is the focus of the EL Practice Guide, and it's mentioned in all 4 recommendations. As Michael said, there's overlap in all 4 recommendations. Recommendation 1 on page 13 of the Practice Guide, if you have it handy, states, teach a set of academic vocabulary words intensively across several days using a variety of instructional activities. As Michael mentioned, recommendation 1 is based on strong evidence and research. For each recommendation, there are 4 or 5 strategies for how to carry out the recommendation. Let's take a look at how-to step 2, which is on page 16. Choose a small set of academic vocabulary for in-depth instruction. By a small set of words, the panel recommends choosing 5 to 8 words. Also, just to clarify, an academic vocabulary word is one that is used when talking or writing in academic settings, but not usually when talking or writing in social settings. In selecting these words, the panel recommends that you use the following criteria. Choose words central to understanding the text. Vocabulary words are often shown in bold by the publisher. However, you know your own students in the classroom. It may be that your students already know the words the publisher has indicated in bold, but may not know other words that you think are central to understanding the text. Please use teacher judgment and select the words that you know are important to teach for your students. Choose words frequently used in a text. Academic words that are used frequently in the text are important to target, as students will have multiple opportunities to encounter these words, or conversely, multiple opportunities to be confused by words they don't know. Choose words that might appear in other content areas. These are high utility words, sometimes called rich vocabulary words. Isabel Beck in her research refers to them as Tier 2 words. Examples are fortunate, convenient, analyze, and persistence. There will be more about these words a little later in the presentation. Words with multiple meanings. Multiple meaning words are useful across several domains, but their meaning may change. For example, volume in science or math refers to the space an object occupies, while in language arts, volume of course means one in a series of books. Volumes Volume can also refer to the intensity of sound. Students who may only know one meaning of the word may stumble in comprehension if they see the word used in a new context. So teaching it explicitly can help them avoid confusion. Words with affixes. Teaching word parts. Word parts, of course, change meaning. Adding the word un to fortunate gives you an instant antonym. Pulling words with affixes for direct instruction allows teachers and students to recognize how word parts can change meanings. Later, words with affixes can help students figure out what unknown words mean during independent reading, particularly if they already know the root word. Words with cross-language potential are also important to choose. Since 80% of our English learners speak Spanish, if you yourself are lucky enough to also speak Spanish, pointing out cognates to students can be a great tool. It provides students with an aha moment and honors their home language. For example, if you just quickly say similar, similar, that might trigger something in a Spanish-speaking student who, when he's in the English-speaking world, he doesn't recognize the word with a different pronunciation. However, be aware of false cognates. Don't embarrass yourself by misusing the famous false cognate embarazada. You might find yourself facing a pregnant pause and then laughter. In the practice guide, there is a reading on page 15, which is an example of an appropriate text for academic vocabulary instruction. From this, in Exhibit 1.3 on page 17, you can see how Ms. Gomez, a third grade teacher, used the criteria that I just described and selects 6 words shown here from the text for in-depth instruction. Exhibit 1.3 takes you through her rationale for selecting these words in the text. Just to go over a couple of words she selected, she chose exhibit, for example, because it is crucial to comprehension of the text. It is a word that can be altered with affixes, for example, exhibition, and it appears multiple times in the text. She also chose impact, again, central to the meaning, appearing more than one time in the text, and it is a cognate, and it appears in other content areas. Options has affixes, optional, and it is a cognate in Spanish, Portuguese, and Haitian Creole. Joe is now going to talk about how to step 3 on page 18, teach academic vocabulary in depth using multiple modalities, writing, speaking, listening. He will cover 2 activities for explicit instruction, also on page 18. Provide student-friendly definitions of the target academic words, and explicitly clarify and reinforce the definitions using examples, non-examples, and concrete representations.
Thank you, Joan. I'm going to start off with a description of student-friendly definitions. No, I call them normal or regular definitions. Okay, there we go. They tell little about the way the word is used, and the reason for that is space. In a traditional dictionary, there isn't much space. And so they don't effectively, the definitions don't effectively convey the new concepts. And years ago, Steve Stahl, a very brilliant vocabulary researcher, says that traditional dictionaries are good if you already know what the word means. So we're dealing here with the denotation, that is what is written in the dictionary, compared to the connotation is how we use it, why we have that word in our language. So let's take an example. This comes from the wonderful researcher Isabel Beck, who I'm sure you all have heard of. And she talks about the definition ally. Now, the first one there, the denotation, is one associated with another. But that doesn't really give you the connotation. But the second one, an ally is someone who helps you with what you're trying to do, especially when there are other people who are against you. That gives the learner the connotation of what an ally is. So if I said to you that Joan and I are colleagues at work, that could mean that we teach the same grade level, we plan together, we team teach, we co-teach, whatever. But or if we don't teach the same grade level, maybe we just go out on Friday night and to a TGIF or something. So we're colleagues. But if I said to you that Joan was my ally at work, then that has a totally different connotation. There's something going on in the workplace where perhaps there are factions, which we know never happens in the schools. But anywho, so you see the difference there between a connotation and denotation. So what exactly are the components of a student-friendly definition? Well, first of all, you want to describe the word by focusing on specific aspects of its meaning, like the second definition of ally, rather than the general description, which was the first definition of ally. And so you want to ask yourself these two questions to get at the connotation. Why do we have this word particularly? Particularly, what do we want to come across to folks with this word? Or why do we have such a word? Why do we have the word ally? What are we trying to get across to folks? So you want to think about those. And then, of course, you want to explain the word's meaning in everyday language. So you want to craft the word, the definition, using words that are part of the student's vocabulary. Okay. So we're going to do a little activity, and we're going to do a poll here. So you're going to tell me whether this definition is friendly or unfriendly. Okay, so here is the definition, and so you can vote whether it's friendly or unfriendly. Okay. So we're going to look at the results. Oh.
I think maybe they see them.
Okay. You'll see here that most of you, 87%, felt that it was unfriendly, and indeed it is unfriendly. So let me show you a friendly definition of reluctant, and you can see the difference. If you are reluctant to do something, you do not want to do it and hesitate before doing it, or do it slowly and without enthusiasm. And so you can see that this one really gives the connotation of the word reluctant. Now, I just want to mention a couple things here. This definition for English learners, depending on their grade level and their level of English language development, as Michael said, you want to teach even, first graders and kindergartners rich words. So if you were going to explain reluctant to someone whose English language development was in the beginning levels, you would have to change two words, I think two words in this definition. One would be hesitate and put it in simpler language, and the other one would be enthusiasm. So you have to kind of tweak your definitions for comprehensible input, which doesn't mean that after the students understand it that you cannot introduce hesitate or enthusiasm, but you want to make sure they understand the connotation before you move on. Okay, friendly or unfriendly protest. So we want you to vote on this one. Here's the poll. Okay. So here we have 80%, about 80% thought it was friendly, and actually this is a student-friendly definition. if you protest against something, or I should say somebody or something, you say or show publicly that you object to it. So this does give the connotation of the word. So let's now talk about examples, non-examples, and concrete representations. Non-examples or contrasting examples really help pinpoint the meaning of the word by providing instances where the definition doesn't apply. And so you're basically telling the child what the word isn't, and I'm going to have a slide coming up that'll clarify that a little bit more. So when you have non-examples, you're solidifying the meanings, you're preventing misconceptions by explicitly telling them the attributes that really are not part of the word's connotation. So let's look at the difference between examples, non-examples, and antonyms. And the reason why I bring this up is we did 2 studies in vocabulary, and when teachers were giving non-examples to students, they were actually antonyms. So let's look at the difference between a non-example and an antonym. Non-examples are words that illustrate instances where the definition doesn't apply, and an antonym, they're words that mean the opposite of your target word. So let's look at non-examples versus antonyms for enormous. A non-example for enormous would be an ant or a pinhead or a speck of dust, where an antonym for enormous would be tiny, small, or minuscule. Okay, so we're going to do another poll here. Tell me whether this is a non-example or an antonym. So the word is precious, and so is the word worthless a non-example or an antonym? Okay. All right, so we're going to broadcast the results here, and actually it is an antonym. Let's see. Let me go back here. Okay. Okay, so the word is precious, an antonym is worthless, a non-example is a bag of sand. So I guess except if you're in a flood-prone area of the country, but basically a bag of sand. Okay, let's try another one. The word is ridiculous. Is eating healthy food a non-example or an antonym? Okay, so we have 98% of the folks say it is a non-example. So let's look at this. The word is ridiculous. An antonym is reasonable, but a non-example is eating healthy food. Okay. Now, concrete representations. These include pictures, diagrams, gestures, realia, facial expressions, demonstrations, all those kinds of things. And the purpose of the concrete representations is to actually, language is, you can't see it. But so what you want to do is make it concrete for them. So you can, in fact, I was in a classroom once where the teacher was teaching the word somersault, and she actually, she was teaching it to first graders. She actually got on her knees and flipped a somersault. Now, I'm not asking you to do that. I'm just trying to make an example of something that's a concrete representation. And I always say, I would suggest that those children will never forget the word somersault. So also, even stick figures, it was very interesting in the same classroom. the teacher that did the somersault, she was using a concrete representation for another word, and I can't remember what it was, but she used stick figures. Well, that also made an impression on the children because they looked up to this teacher so much, but they were shocked that teacher couldn't draw. So she could do a somersault, but she couldn't draw. But still, I believe they didn't forget that word because of the impact that made on them. So with the internet, you can use a lot of pictures and things like that, and it's not too hard to do. So we're going to watch a video of a teacher pre-teaching vocabulary in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade newcomer class. And before I show it, I want you to be thinking about two questions. Here they are. What was the goal of the teacher's lesson? And describe how the lesson was taught explicitly. So you can write your thoughts in the questions and discussion there that you've been writing your questions in. So I'm going to back up a little bit, and I'm going to show you this video. It's about 4 minutes or so.
The next word that we have is pattern. Everyone, pattern.
Pattern.
Okay, and pattern is a noun. Let me write it. Yes.
What's a pattern?
Ooh, good question. We're going to write down the definition of pattern. So we're going to write, it is a repeated, let's start with the word. Pattern is a repeated or regular way in which something is done. Okay, sorry for that. It's a little messy, but that's a P at the beginning. Pattern, that's the same word here. So there's a key word here. The key word is repeated. Something that repeats. Okay, something that is done over again or that we see again. Okay, so I'm going to give you examples of pattern. Okay, for example, the American flag. You see the American flag up there? The American flag follows a pattern with the red and white stripes. Do you see that? Red, white, red, white. Okay. We're looking at the stripes. See, this is a pattern because it is repeating. Red, white, red, white. So the stripes have a pattern that repeats. Another example, I'm looking at Ronnie, and his shirt has a pattern of stripes. Do you see that? Do you see Ronnie's shirt?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, my sweater too.
Your sweater has a pattern. That's right. That's the first thing I thought of when I saw you this morning. What is the pattern on your shirt?
Blue and red.
Blue and red what? What do we call those lines? Stripes. Stripes, rayas, stripes. So your stripes are horizontal and Ronnie's stripes are vertical. Okay. Here's another example of pattern. Okay. 2, 4, 6, 8. I'm counting by twos. Counting by twos is a pattern because I'm repeating the same thing. It's not the same number, but I'm adding 2 to each value. So that's a repeated pattern. So good, those are examples of patterns. Now I'm going to show you what is not a pattern. Does my clothing have a pattern?
No.
There's no pattern. No pattern. There's nothing. Okay. Let me see. If I drop my highlighters, I actually did drop one. If I drop all my highlighters and they scatter all over the place, there's no organization or anything on the way they fill. That is not a pattern because they're everywhere. They're scattered. No, it doesn't repeat, right? I'm not going to drop them because I don't want to have to pick them up. Let me see. Oh, every weekend I do something different. I like to try new things. That is not a pattern because it's different, right? It does not repeat, okay? It does not repeat, okay? Here's an example of not a something that is not a pattern. Is this a pattern?
No.
You don't know what number is coming next. We don't know what's repeating. This is not a pattern. Not a pattern. No pattern.
Okay. I'm going through here. Let's see. Someone said that she's connecting background knowledge to help them understand, which is true. And another person said the goal is to teach the word pattern. She uses synonym repetition through examples involving the students in this understanding, and she also uses non-examples. So, and that's correct, but we're trying to show in this video were the elements that I previously talked about. One thing I want to say before we move on in this presentation is the purpose of this video was to show explicit instruction for teaching vocabulary. The teacher did, after we videotaped, after the crew left, the teacher did have students talk to each other. So she did think, pair, share, where she proposed things like tell your partner what pattern what the definition of pattern. Talk to your partner about an example of pattern and a non-example. And then after each question was posed, then she did a debrief. So it gave the students a chance to practice their responses so that if they were called on, that they could speak more comfortably because they've already rehearsed, and so that they could share with the rest of the class. It's not reflected in this video intentionally, but I did want to bring that to you, that there was kids talking together, which is one of the how-to steps in the practice guide, so I wanted to bring that out. So I think we can go back now to the PowerPoints. Oh, there we go. It's like magic. Okay. And so Joan, I'm going to turn it back over to Joan, and she'll bring it home, as they say.
Okay, recommendation 2 on page 31 is integrate oral and written English language instruction into content area teaching. There is strong evidence in research to support this recommendation. Recommendation 2 aligns perfectly with Common Core standards. Common Core standards recognize that the development of each student's literacy skills is a shared responsibility. Therefore, literacy instruction is now included in science, social studies, and history because students need to be able to use language effectively in a variety of content areas, not just during language, arts, and ELD. To me, as a teacher that's been around since the 1980s, this is a great leap forward in terms of teaching English learners and will benefit all students who need additional support. To not just teach language vocabulary instruction during ELD, for example, but to spread it around to all content areas. In terms of how to implement this recommendation, How-To Step 2 on page 37 of the practice guide states, explicitly teach the content-specific academic vocabulary as well as the general academic vocabulary that supports it during content area instruction. Earlier, when I discussed choosing words, I talked about choosing high utility words, tier 2 words, that appear in multiple content areas. These words are also called general academic vocabulary. You see some examples on the slide: environment, factor, exhibit, investigate, and transition. Content or domain-specific academic vocabulary, such as the examples given on the slide, commutative and prime number, are specialized words and are necessary for understanding the particular content area being studied. Isabel Beck refers to these words as tier 3 vocabulary words. Okay, now we're going to have another poll. You're going to choose if it's a content-specific or a general academic word. Okay, surround. What is your vote for the word surround? Okay. This is no contest. You are 100% right. This is a general academic word. For example, you can say the skull surrounds the brain in science, and you can say the Allied forces surrounded the enemy in history or social studies. Very good. Excellent. Here's another word. Pie. Okay, excellent again. The ratio of a circle's circumference is to its diameter. Pi is a ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter unless you add an E on the end. Then you have something else. All right, thank you so much. Okay, to wrap up this presentation, we have listed 3 websites that provide student-friendly definitions of words, as was part of Joe's presentation: the Longman Dictionary of Contemporary English, Merriam-Webster's Learner's Dictionary, and Collins-Colville Advanced Dictionary. Thank you so much, and I think it's now time for some questions. And I noticed others of you also put some student-friendly resources on the web, and thank you very much for that.
And